I always thought Christmas was the one time of year I could count on family. The lights, the food, the laughter, all of it meant nothing without the people you loved sitting around the table with you. For decades, no matter how hard life got, I made sure my son had that. This year, I found myself sitting alone in a quiet house, staring at a tree that looked more like a ghost than a celebration. And it all started with a phone call I'll never forget. It was Daniel, my son, my only boy. He didn't call often these days, so when his name flashed on the screen, I smiled before I even picked up. But the moment I heard his voice, I knew something was off. "Dad," he said, his tone stiff, like he was reading from a script he didn't want to follow. "This year, maybe it's better if you don't come for Christmas." I thought I misheard him. "What do you mean, don't come?" "Daniel, it's Christmas. We always—" He cut me off, his voice breaking just a little. "Emily's family is hosting. It's going to be crowded. She thinks it might be complicated." Complicated. That word hit me harder than a fist to the gut. I've been called stubborn, hardworking, even old-fashioned, but complicated? From my own son? My throat tightened. "So that's it?" I asked. "After everything, I just stay home alone?" He hesitated. I could almost hear him squirming on the other end. Then came a soft, defeated, "I'm sorry, Dad. Sorry. That's all. No fight. No defense. No. Emily, he's my father. He's coming whether you like it or not. Just sorry." When the line went dead, I sat there with the phone still in my hand, staring at nothing. The house felt smaller than ever. That night, I turned on the little tree in the corner of my living room. It wasn't much, just a few strings of lights and ornaments Daniel had made when he was a boy. My hand lingered on one of them, a crooked clay star with his initials scratched into the back. Back then, he'd run around the house in his pajamas, begging me to stay up so we could catch Santa. Margaret, God rest her soul, would laugh and make cocoa while I pretended to check the roof for reindeer tracks. Those were the days Christmas meant something. Now here I was, 62 years old, staring at that same star and realizing I'd been erased from my own son's holiday. Margaret always used to say, "It's not about the gifts, Rich. It's about being present." Well, I was present. Always. Through every scraped knee, every school project, every late-night call from college when he didn't know how to balance his finances. I was there. And somehow, being present wasn't enough anymore. I should have seen this coming. Ever since Daniel married Emily, the distance had been growing. Her family, the Langfords, are the kind of people who measure worth in money and pedigree. They never said it outright, but I could see it in their eyes every time I shook their hands. To them, I wasn't Richard Hale, the father who sacrificed everything. I was just a construction worker with rough hands and a modest house. One Christmas, I remember sitting at their long dining table, surrounded by crystal and silver, trying to share a funny story about Daniel as a kid. Emily cut me off with a little laugh. "Oh, Richard, that's cute, but Daniel's past all that now." The table chuckled. My story died. Daniel stayed silent. That silence grew year after year, until finally, it came in the form of a phone call telling me not to bother showing up at all. On Christmas Eve, I wrapped myself in a heavy coat and stepped outside. Snowflakes drifted down, soft and perfect, like the world didn't know or care how hollow I felt inside. I imagined Daniel at the Langfords' mansion, laughter, music, champagne flowing. Emily smiling proudly at how she'd finally managed to cut me out. It wasn't just exclusion. It was erasure, like I'd never mattered. But as I stood there in the cold, a strange calm settled over me. If they thought I'd just fade quietly into the background, they were wrong. I knew something they didn't. I still held pieces of their perfect little world together, pieces they couldn't afford to lose. And that's when the anger hardened into something else, resolve. "They'll remember who I am," I whispered into the night. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just going to be another lonely Christmas. No, this was the beginning of something bigger. The beginning of my revenge. When Daniel told me not to come for Christmas, the wound cut deep. But it wasn't just about the holiday. It was about everything that came before it. All the years, the sacrifices, the blood and sweat I poured into making sure he had a life I never did. Sitting there in the quiet, I found myself drifting back through time, replaying it all like an old film reel I couldn't turn off. That I was 22 when Daniel was born. Barely a man myself, but the moment I held him in my arms, I knew what my purpose was. I promised him, though he couldn't hear me, that I would give him everything I had. And I kept that promise. While my friends chased careers that looked glamorous on paper, I put on a hard hat and steel-toed boots. Construction wasn't glamorous. It was long days, bad backs, and calloused hands. But it was steady. And steady meant food on the table, rent paid, and a boy who could grow up without worrying where his next meal would come from. There were times I worked double shifts, crawling into bed just before dawn, only to wake up 3 hours later to do it all again. Margaret used to worry about me. "Rich, you'll kill yourself working like this," she'd say, her eyes soft but tired. I'd smile, kiss her forehead, and whisper back, "Better me than Daniel. He's not going to carry these burdens." People don't realize how sacrifice works. It's not always big, flashy gestures. Sometimes it's the little choices you make every single day. Vacations? Never took them. While other families were out at beaches or Disney World, we stayed home. Daniel used to ask why, and I'd tell him, "Someday, son. Someday, you'll see the world." That someday never came for me, but it did for him. College trips, internships abroad, all paid for because I took every extra dollar I had and funneled it into his future. I remember once, the guys at work pitched in to buy tickets for the Super Bowl. They begged me to join. Lord knows I wanted to. I've been a football man all my life. But when I looked at the price of that ticket, all I saw was a semester's worth of books for Daniel. So I told them no, and I worked overtime that weekend instead. To this day, I've never stepped foot in a stadium. But Daniel? He's been to more games than I can count, sitting in box seats with Emily's family. Funny how that works. When Daniel graduated college, I thought all those years of sacrifice were worth it. I sat in the audience in my best suit. It wasn't much, but Margaret made sure it was pressed and neat. Watching him walk across that stage, cap and gown shining under the lights, my chest swelled with pride. Afterward, he came running up, diploma in hand. For a moment, I saw my little boy again, beaming like he'd just scored the winning goal in a backyard game. "Dad, I did it," he shouted. "You sure did, son," I said, pulling him into a hug. "And don't you forget who had the loudest cheer in that room." We laughed. That was one of the last times I felt like I hadn't lost him to another world. Because not long after, Emily came along. I'll admit, at first, I was just happy he found someone who made him smile. Emily was polished, put together, from one of those families with country club memberships and vacation homes. But it didn't take long for me to realize she wasn't marrying into our family. Daniel was marrying into hers. She never outright disrespected me, but her little jabs spoke louder than words. "Oh, Richard, you still live in that same house. Richard, construction must be so tiring at your age. Richard, you must be so proud Daniel won't have to work with his hands like you did." Always with that smile, sweet as sugar, sharp as glass. And Daniel, he just laughed it off, or worse, stayed silent. I brushed it aside at first. Love makes a man blind, and I wanted to believe she cared for him. But slowly, I saw her tighten her grip. Holidays became their way. Family gatherings were at her house, and I was reduced to a visitor, tolerated rather than welcomed. When Margaret passed, I thought Daniel would pull closer. We were all we had left of her, after all. I thought grief might bind us, father and son, against the ache of losing the woman who'd been our anchor. But instead, the gap widened. Emily took over everything: funeral planning, flower arrangements, even the obituary. I felt like a guest at my own wife's farewell. After the service, Daniel hugged me and said, "Don't worry, Dad. You'll always have us." I clung to those words. They gave me hope. But words are easy. It's the actions that tell you the truth. And his actions, year by year, holiday by holiday, told me I was no longer part of us. So when he told me not to come this Christmas, it wasn't just rejection. It was confirmation. All those years of working until my bones ached. All the nights Margaret and I whispered about whether we'd have enough for tuition. All the holidays we skipped so Daniel could have more than we did. It all led here. To me, sitting in an empty house while my son laughed in a mansion I'd helped him reach, with people who saw me as nothing but a burden. I'd given him everything, and in return, he gave me silence. But here's the thing about sacrifices. When you've given so much, you've also built something powerful. Something people don't always realize until it's too late. And as I sat there, staring at the old clay star hanging crooked on my little tree, I knew one truth. Emily and her family were about to learn exactly who Richard Hale was. Because I wasn't just some forgotten old man. I was the foundation. And without me, their whole house would crumble. The phone call came 3 days before Christmas. Funny how one conversation, just a few minutes long, can split your life in two, the before and the after. I was fixing a loose hinge on the kitchen cabinet when my phone buzzed on the counter. Daniel's name lit up the screen. My heart jumped, like it always does when your child calls you, no matter how old they are. "Hey, son," I answered, trying to sound cheerful, wiping my hands on a rag. "You ready for Christmas? Should I bring the old ornaments Margaret loved so much?" Silence. Just the faint hum of air on the other end. Then Daniel cleared his throat. "Dad, listen, this year's going to be a little different." I frowned. Different how? He hesitated, and in that pause, I felt my chest tighten. "Emily's family is hosting," he said at last. "They're planning a big dinner, and with all the guests, it might be complicated if you came." There it was again. That cursed word. Complicated. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Complicated? "Daniel, it's Christmas. I'm your father. What could be complicated about me sitting at the table with you?" He sighed, and I heard the exhaustion in his voice. Or was it guilt? Maybe both. "Dad, you know how Emily's parents are. They think it's best to keep things simple this year." I clenched the phone so hard my knuckles went white. Simple? By cutting me out? By pretending I don't exist? "Please don't take it that way," he said quickly. "It's just 1 year. We'll make it up to you." 1 year? My voice cracked, sharper than I intended. How many times have I heard that, Daniel? Every holiday, I'm pushed further and further back, like I'm some distant relative instead of your father. On the other end, he went quiet. And that silence, that damned silence, hurt more than any insult. Finally, he whispered, "I'm sorry, Dad. Sorry." That was all. No fight. No standing up for me. No reminder to Emily that his father was family too. Just sorry. And then the line went dead. I stood there in the kitchen, phone still pressed against my ear long after the call had ended. The hinge lay unfinished on the counter. The room felt colder somehow, emptier. For a long time, I didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. Margaret used to say silence could be peaceful. But this silence? It was suffocating. It wasn't peace. It was erasure. I thought of all the Christmas mornings when Daniel tore into presents under the tree, his little face glowing as Margaret handed him cocoa. I thought of all the nights I worked through blisters and bruises to make sure he had more than I ever did. And now, after everything, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. A complication. When Christmas morning came, I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. I brewed myself a pot of coffee, set a single plate at the table, and even warmed up a pie I'd baked the night before. Margaret would have been proud of the crust. But when I sat down, fork in hand, the silence pressed down on me again. No laughter, no music, no family. Just me, an empty chair, and a tree with ornaments that told stories no one seemed to remember anymore. I turned on the radio. Carols drifted through the speakers. They sounded hollow. Every lyric felt like mockery. Somewhere across town, Daniel was probably raising a glass of champagne, smiling in a room full of people who didn't even want me there. Maybe Emily had even joked about how much simpler the night was without me. I stared at the crooked clay star Daniel made as a boy, hanging proudly at the top of my tree. My throat tightened. That little boy would have never left me out in the cold. But he was gone. In his place stood a man who had traded his roots for crystal glasses and polite applause. Around noon, I stepped outside. The snow was falling thick and heavy, blanketing the yard in white. I stood there in my coat, breath puffing in the cold air, and looked up at the sky. For the first time in years, I let myself cry. Quiet, bitter tears that stung worse than any wound I'd ever had on a job site. Not because I was alone. No, I'd been alone before. It was because of the betrayal. Because my son, the boy I'd carried on my shoulders, the man I'd worked myself raw to support, had chosen them over me. That's when the anger came. Slow at first, then hotter, sharper, until it filled my chest like fire. They thought I was weak. They thought I'd fade quietly into the background, forgotten. But I wasn't some frail old man they could sweep aside. I was Richard Hale. And I had one thing Emily and her family didn't know: leverage. All those years of sacrifice hadn't just built Daniel's future. They'd tied his success, his house, his comfortable life, to me. And if Emily thought she could erase me, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. That night, as I sat by the dim glow of the tree, I made a vow. Not out loud, just deep in my soul where no one could hear it but me and Margaret, wherever she was. I promised I wouldn't let them discard me like a broken ornament. I promised I'd remind Daniel exactly who had built the foundation beneath his feet. And most of all, I promised Emily that the empire she thought was hers to control would crack the moment I pulled my hand away. Because you can't build a life on betrayal and expect it to stand. Not when the man you betrayed is still alive to tear it down. After that lonely Christmas, something inside me shifted. Grief turned into anger, and anger hardened into resolve. I wasn't going to beg for a place at their table anymore. No, I was going to make them remember why they should never have pushed me out in the first place. You see, Emily and her family thought they'd won. They thought they had Daniel wrapped so tightly around their fingers that I no longer mattered. What they didn't know was that, for all their polished manners and inherited wealth, they still relied on me. And I was done playing the quiet, forgotten father. A few days after Christmas, I ran into an old friend, George, who worked in finance. Over coffee, he mentioned something that stuck with me. You know, Rich, he said, stirring his cup, Emily's father isn't as bulletproof as he pretends. Heard he's got some shaky investments. Whole family could be in trouble if things don't pan out. I didn't react outwardly, but inside, my heart thudded. Trouble in paradise. That night, I dug through my old files, documents I hadn't touched in years. Property deeds, loan agreements, business papers. And there it was, proof of everything I'd poured into Daniel's life. The college fund, I built it by selling the land my father left me. The down payment on his first house came from my retirement savings. Even his current business, I'd co-signed the loans that got it off the ground. Without me, that business wouldn't exist. Without me, Daniel and Emily wouldn't have the life they flaunted today. And more importantly, a few of those assets still legally tied back to me. Strings they didn't realize I still held. As I sifted through the papers, memories rushed back. I remembered the night I signed away my land, hands trembling as I passed the deed across the lawyer's desk. Are you sure, Mr. Hale? The lawyer asked. That land's been in your family for generations. I nodded. My boy's future is worth more than dirt. And it had been. At least, I thought so then. Now, staring at those yellowed pages, I realized that land, and every dollar I'd sacrificed, had become the rope Emily's family used to pull Daniel away from me. But ropes can also be used to pull someone back, or to hang them by their own greed. 2 weeks into the new year, I got a call from George again. Rich, he chuckled, you won't believe this. Emily's folks are throwing some massive New Year gala. Word is, they're trying to prove they're still on top, even though they're drowning in debt. I felt a smile creep onto my face for the first time in weeks. A party. Perfect. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. But not the kind they expected. I started small. Met with my lawyer. Reviewed every document twice. Made sure every receipt, every transfer, every signature was in order. Then I had copies made. Clean, undeniable proof that Daniel's success wasn't built on Emily's family's money or cleverness. No, it was built on me. On my sweat, my sacrifices, my choices. And I tucked those papers neatly into a leather folder. Every night, I'd sit at the kitchen table, folder in front of me, rehearsing what I'd say. Not shouting, not begging. Calm. Controlled. The truth laid bare for everyone to see. Because the sweetest revenge isn't anger. It's dignity. It's standing tall, while those who wronged you crumble under the weight of their own lies. The night before the gala, I barely slept. I sat by the glow of my little tree. Still up, though Christmas had long passed, and thought of Margaret. She would have told me to forgive, to let it go. She always believed in turning the other cheek. But Margaret wasn't here to see the way our son had turned his back on me. She wasn't here to hear him say complicated, like I was nothing but baggage. So I whispered to her picture, I'm not doing this out of spite, love. I'm doing it because he needs to remember where he came from. And they need to learn that you don't spit on the hand that built your foundation. For the first time in years, I felt steady. When I looked in the mirror that night, I didn't see a broken old man anymore. I saw Richard Hale, the father, the builder, the man who'd carried his family on his back. And tomorrow, I'd walk into their glittering party, not as an outsider, not as the complication they wanted to erase, but as the reckoning they never saw coming. Because they thought I'd stay silent. They thought I'd fade away. But silence has its limits. And mine had run out. The night of the Langfords' gala came cold and clear, The kind of winter evening where the stars feel sharp enough to cut. I pulled my best suit from the back of the closet, the same one I'd worn to Daniel's graduation, pressed and polished. My hands may have been rough, my knuckles scarred, but that night, I carried myself like a man who belonged. The Langford estate glowed like a palace at the edge of town, every window spilling golden light into the frosted night. Cars lined the driveway, sleek imports and polished classics, the kind of wealth that screamed for attention. I walked past them, steady and unshaken, folder tucked under my arm. People whispered as I entered, some faces lighting with recognition, others tightening with surprise. And then I saw her, Emily. Emily floated through the crowd like she owned the air itself, champagne glass in hand, smile sharp enough to slice marble. Daniel trailed behind her, polite but pale, like a man who'd forgotten how to breathe on his own. When her eyes landed on me, her smile faltered, just for a second, but I saw it. "Richard," she said, her tone cool, polite enough for company. What a surprise. I returned her smile, calm as stone. Wouldn't miss it. After all, family should be together during the holidays, don't you think? Daniel stepped forward, guilt flashing in his eyes. "Dad, I didn't." But Emily laid a hand on his arm, silencing him, the way she always did. As the night went on, I lingered near the edges of conversations, listening. Emily's parents bragged about business deals, about stocks and properties. They painted pictures of security and grandeur, but I heard the cracks beneath the surface. Desperation disguised as confidence. At one point, Emily's father, Charles Langford, raised his glass. "To family," he boomed. "And to the future we've built together." The crowd cheered. Glasses clinked. But I felt the weight of my folder under my arm and knew the truth. They hadn't built that future. I had. And it was time everyone knew it. I waited until the music softened, until the chatter lulled just enough that voices carried. Then I stepped forward, clearing my throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, commanding attention without shouting. "I'd like to make a toast." Emily stiffened. "Richard, this isn't." But I raised my glass anyway. "To family. The ones who sacrifice. The ones who build. The ones who give everything, even when it costs them everything." Eyes turned. Murmurs rippled. And then I set my glass down, opened the leather folder, and laid the documents out on the polished dining table. Deeds. Receipts. Loan papers. Proof stacked on proof. "You see," I continued, "while some of you toast to success, you forget the foundation beneath your feet. My son's education, his business, even the home you gather in tonight. All of it was built on the sacrifices of a man you chose to cast aside." The room went silent. You could have heard the clink of a fork against a plate a mile away. I turned my gaze to Daniel. His face had gone pale, his mouth slightly open, eyes darting between me and Emily. "Daniel," I said quietly but firmly, "when you told me I was a complication, you forgot the truth. Without me, there is no you. Without me, none of this exists." Emily's mask cracked. "This is outrageous," she snapped, her voice rising, brittle with panic. "Dragging private matters into a party." I cut her off, my voice calm but sharp as a blade. "Private? You made it public the day you tried to erase me. The day you told my son his own father wasn't welcome at his table." Gasps echoed. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Others stared at Emily like they'd just seen her slip on her polished veneer. Daniel finally spoke, his voice breaking. "Dad, I didn't know. I didn't realize." I met his eyes, steady. "That's the problem, son. You never asked. You never wanted to know what it cost to give you the life you have." I gathered the papers, slid them back into the folder, and closed it with finality. Then I straightened my jacket, looked Emily square in the eye, and said, "You may have tried to cut me out, but remember this. You can't erase the foundation without watching the whole house collapse." Then I turned and walked out. No shouting, no chaos, just the heavy silence of truth laid bare. As I stepped into the cold night air, I felt lighter. Not because the pain was gone. No, that would linger for a long time. But because I'd taken back my voice. I wasn't the forgotten father anymore. I was the man who built the ground they stood on. And they would never forget it again. The night air bit at my skin as I walked away from the Langford estate. But for the first time in years, the cold didn't sting. It felt like clarity, like freedom. Behind me, I could still hear muffled voices, the guests whispering, Daniel calling after me, Emily's sharp tone trying to pull the threads of her world back together. But I didn't turn around. Not once. Because that night wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. The drive home was quiet. No music, no distractions. Just the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of my thoughts. For years, I believed sacrifice was the same thing as love. That giving everything, my time, my money, my pride, was the only way to prove I was a good father. But sacrifice without respect isn't love. It's servitude. I pulled into my driveway, the house dimly lit, the porch light flickering. Small, modest, empty. And yet, for the first time in a long while, it felt like mine. I poured myself a drink, sat in my worn armchair, and let the silence wrap around me like an old blanket. My chest was heavy, yes, but beneath that weight, something else stirred, relief. The phone rang the next morning. I didn't need to check the caller ID to know who it was. Dad, Daniel's voice cracked on the other end. I don't even know where to start. I stayed quiet, letting the silence push him forward. I saw everything last night. The papers, the sacrifices. I didn't know. Emily. She told me not to ask, not to bring it up. She said it would only complicate things. And I believed her. I'm so sorry. I closed my eyes. His words hurt, but not the way they used to. Because I finally understood something. His ignorance hadn't been an accident. It had been a choice. Daniel, I said softly, you didn't want to know. That's the part that breaks me. Not the mistakes. Not Emily's poison. The fact that you let yourself be blind. He went silent. I could hear his breathing, shaky and uneven. Finally, he whispered, "Can I make it right?" I thought long and hard before answering. "That's not a question for me, son. That's for you. You'll have to live with the choices you've made, and the ones you'll make next." Then I hung up. For days after, I kept thinking about that call. About the boy I'd raised, the man he'd become, and the line that now stood between us. Once, I might have begged for reconciliation. I might have bent my pride just to stay in his life, no matter the cost. But now I realized that begging only deepened the wound. I could forgive him, yes, but I didn't know him my silence anymore. Word spread quickly after the party. People in town started to look at me differently. Not as the old fool who clung to the past, but as the man who had the courage to stand up in a room full of liars and speak the truth. Some neighbors dropped by with casseroles, awkward smiles, and hesitant words of support. Others simply nodded when they passed me in town, respect etched into their expressions. And slowly, I felt the shift inside me. The betrayal hadn't broken me. It had carved me into something stronger. On Christmas morning, I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the snow drift down like feathers from a torn pillow. I thought about Emily's sharp smile, about Daniel's hollow eyes, about the years I'd spent breaking my back for people who saw me as expendable. And I realized something important. Revenge isn't about destroying the people who wronged you. It's about reclaiming the pieces of yourself they tried to take. That night at the gala, I hadn't just exposed the Langfords. I'd exposed myself, my strength, my worth, my truth. And no one could take that from me again. So here I sit, telling you this story, not as a broken man, but as a man who rose from the fire of betrayal and walked out whole. My son may never fully understand the weight of what I carried for him. Emily may never admit the poison she poured into our lives. But that doesn't matter anymore, because I've learned that the sweetest revenge isn't served to others. It's served to yourself, in the form of peace, dignity, and the courage to keep standing tall, no matter who tries to tear you down. And that, my friends, is the end of my story. Thanks for listening. Please share your thoughts in comment section, and also do like the video and subscribe to the channel.